Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be continuing with my Broken Lands campaign review. So this is going to be part 3, there's a part 4 as well, it'll be coming up. And then we're going to be done with this series. And I have something new I'm going to be doing, which is a bunch of multi-class tier rankings. So a while back I had a viewer who requested me to do a bunch of class and subclass tier rankings, which I really like that idea. The problem is, though, tons of other people have already done it, and other than maybe like having some minor changes where I move something up or down compared to somebody else's ranking, I didn't really know what I was going to be able to offer that would be different or unique. But then yesterday when I was at work, because obviously I wasn't thinking about work, I came up with the idea of doing multi-class tier rankings. So the basic idea is just going to be, I'll go class by class in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Artificer, and we'll just look at all the different, multi-class combinations, just limiting ourselves to 2 classes for now, because otherwise we'll have like a million combinations. And I'll just rank them all, which was I think a good, bad, where they fall in. If there's any particular subclasses that I think are particularly a good fit, we'll talk about those. We're not going to look at every subclass combination because also that would take forever. But I just think it would be kind of a neat idea. I do a lot of multi-classing videos anyways, so it'd be kind of like a tie-in with all of that. But it'll also give people an idea of where, if you want to play an Artificer or a Ranger or a Druid, what might you want to mix that with, right? And I don't know, I just think it'll be a fun series, so I'm looking forward to that. But whatever, we're not quite there yet though. We still got this and one more episode of the Broken Lands to get through. So this video could be kind of lengthy. I'm going to try to hurry, but also cover everything. So if I'm a little hazy on some details, please forgive me, but whatever. So up till now, we've got our party. They have overthrown a bunch of slave lords and destroyed that organization, and then in the second part they mostly end up helping a bunch of monks from this place called the Red Monastery. They also end up joining up towards the end. They end up helping a bunch of fae, and they're showing a vision by the 3 sisters of these 4 different people who they were going to meet and who they were going to help and who were going to help the party in return. One of them was this girl with a glass hand named Zhao Ling, who they've already heard about, and is currently at the Red Monastery, it turns out, by the time they get back, with her army. One of them was a girl who I described her as looking like a tiefling, but she was like white skin, and her name was Ash, and they find out she's at some place called the Course of Chaos. They see a half-orc with plate mail, and in one hand he's holding like a flame-tongued greatsword, but with the other hand he's casting some sort of spell. And he is described as the wizard. So Zhao Ling is the warrior, Ash is the priest, Murren is the half-orc's name, he is the wizard, and then they also get the rogue, and they just see this large mouse who's walking on his hind legs, and he's got this sword belt with a rapier that's in his hand, and he's got a cloak and stuff and a hat. He looks like one of the the Disney movie The Three Musketeers. He looks like one of those guys, but it's actually the Mouse King from the previous campaign, but the party did not recognize him, which is unfortunate. They recognize him when they meet him later though. But anyways, so they know that they have to find these 4 different people and help them. Like I said, they return back to the Red Monastery, and Zhao Ling's army is already there, and Zhao Ling is actually in the library doing a bunch of research because she is trying to find a way to get back her dead husband and son who are in the realm of death now. And so she's now serving this guy called the Iron Mage, and this is basically what he told her that he wants her to do, and that will also help him because he wants the civil war of their people to end. And originally, she was the leader of House Yen. Her husband was the leader of House Yao. Their marriage was supposed to end the civil war that had been going on before that, which it did temporarily. But then they were betrayed her husband was murdered, their son was murdered, her hand got chopped off, she was locked in a tower and a garden for basically 10 years, and then, Iron Mage sets her free, gives her a glass hand and a bunch of magical powers, and sends her to restore order to the way he wants it, essentially, in exchange for her serving him, of course. So he's also told her that in the books, in the Red Monastery, she will find a way to reach the realm of death. So she discovers that at some point in the past, the god of trickery had actually stole one of the death god's swords. And it turns out the death god doesn't really care that much. He's got a lot of swords, it turns out. But it was still a funny prank at the time, so good on the god of trickery. But anyway, he steals the death god's sword, and the death god's sword can actually slice through the chains that bind the gates into the realm of death, essentially, right? And so she wants to find this temple where the sword is, and apparently the Red Monastery books have some clues to lead her there. So the party and her begin searching for the information. Sure enough, they do manage to find an account of the god of trickery stealing the sword and hiding it in this abandoned temple to this exiled moon god. And the party kind of like, okay, well, that's interesting. But they also mentioned the god of trickery left behind some tricks and traps and some guardians to protect the sword, because he thought the death god might come after it, which the death god never did, because, even though he was angry, like I said, he's got a million swords. He didn't need this one. So the party end up finding the temple, fight their way through, overcome the tricks and traps and the guardians. And there was a kind of funny moment towards the end where they're fighting like the priest of the god of trickery and all the other minions that are still there. And the high priest is like, oh, even if you do take the sword, it'll be meaningless to you, because, it is written that only the death god can wield it. No hands of flesh or bone may hold it. And the party's paladin, Diza, is like, yeah, but she's got a glass hand. And Shaolin removes her gauntlet, and the guy's like, oh, kill them. And of course, they fail to kill them. The party massacre them all. I actually thought the fight would be closer, but it wasn't particularly close. So the party ends up retrieving the death god's sword. And I didn't want the sword, I wanted it to be powerful, but I didn't want it to be something the party would be using all the time. I also didn't want it to kind of overshadow the party. And this is something I talked about before with Xiaoling. I had the idea that she was going to be, for this part of the adventure, just kind of like another party member, essentially, right? It'd be an extra companion who joins the party on their mission. And I didn't want her to be like Gandalf or somebody, always having to save the day, where she's way more powerful than everybody else. But I also didn't want her to be essentially useless and just getting dragged along behind, right? She was, supposed to be on an even tier with the rest of the party. She already has a magic sword. So my idea was, the Death God's sword, whenever you unsheathed it, it would just have this necrotic aura. It was basically like a circle of death spell going off every single round, right? Including to the wielder. But of course, if it's the Death God, he's immune, so he doesn't care, right? But even holding the sword, usually you just die because Xiaoling has her glass hand. She's only affected by the aura, just like everybody else. But this meant that she couldn't really use the sword a lot, except for its designed purpose, which would basically just shatter the chains that seal the gates, right? And this way, I didn't have to worry about nerfing the Death God's sword and making it worthless, but also I didn't have some NPC who just kills everything and does all the party's work for them. Now it's like this, it's almost like a key to unlock the door. You just had to do a quest to get, right? But anyways, so that was the idea there. So the party go to the tunnel, which leads to the Death God's realm, which is, of course, as I described last time, underneath the shell of Shatrath the Destroyer. And Shatrath was this primordial turtle god creature, and its shell is half buried into the ground from when it died fighting the gods, but the half that isn't buried sticks 300 feet into the air, right? So that gives you an idea how big the turtle was, right? Anyways, the tunnel underneath him, there's a bunch of undead they fight, but nothing else really wants to go here because people can just kind of sense that there's something wrong with this place. It does lead directly to the realm of death, right? So not a great spot. But if you're undead, you might like it. And then, like I mentioned before, like the party, like they cross like this bridge, and then from there you're like in this kind of like demi realm that's like halfway between, right? And the journey was always 9 days. I decided because I think I got that from a Thor comic actually. But anyways, it's always 9 days, whether you ride, run, walk, crawl, whatever. As long as you're like trying to move, time's counting. It'll always take you 9 days. And you can't teleport there, obviously. You're in like your own pocket dimension, right? Anyways, they get to the gate, of course. Everybody gets way back. Xiaoling draws a sword, and destroys the chains, and then resheaths it again. And the party enter the realm of death. And of course, they see a lot of undead. They do have a couple of fights and skirmishes, but a lot of the dead don't really care about the party. A lot of them are just like spirits and ghosts and stuff, right? But they do find this ship that they eventually find like this sea, and none of them want to try stepping into water, which by the way was a smart move on the party's part. It was basically like the river Styx, essentially. But they do see this boat that docks, and all these like the dead are like getting onto the boat. So the parties decide to like try walking on too, and the captain's like, okay, and he addresses them and says like, it's not often that we see the living here, but it's not really my problem. The living do come occasionally, and eventually you're going to come back again, just not living. So he ends up like ferrying them across the sea. They go through like this labyrinth thing, and end up fighting like a death tyrant, like an undead beholder, right? But eventually they get to the Death God City, and they end up finding him. And I didn't want... Alright, so I knew that there was going to be some sort of confrontation with the Death God, obviously, right? Because Xiaoling wants her husband and her son back, and the Death God doesn't really want to give them back, right? But I also didn't want... Just like I didn't want the sword to dominate everything, I don't really want to, like, nerf the Death God. And I should mention, like... Because so the Death God is Neril, which is, I believe, the same Death God they used in, like, Greyhawk campaign until it was defeated by the Raven Queen. But anyways, in my world, Neril is the god of death and war, which in my opinion are two of the big domains, right? So I kind of had this idea that him and the goddess of life, Shara, who's also the goddess of the sun and the goddess of the harvest and a bunch of other stuff, they were probably the two most powerful gods currently in the pantheon, and she's the neutral good god and he's the neutral evil god. They're kind of at cross purposes, right? But because they both lead like major domains, I kind of feel like Neril's one of those powerful gods in the pantheon, and the party's only like 13 or 14 at this point, so I don't really want them to fight him, because if I'm going to do the Death God any justice, he's just going to destroy the party, and I don't really want to nerf him down because that's kind of going to cheapen if they win. And I'm not against the party eventually being able to fight him, maybe when they're like 19th or 20th level or something. But, not when you're like 13th level kind of thing, right? So I knew that I didn't want it to be a fight. Oh, crap. I should have mentioned something when I talked about the Fate Sisters. That's why I mentioned them in the first place. As part of the party's reward for helping them and for restoring the Moonlit King to his sanity, one of them gives Eldon the Rogue a playing card. And it just says death on it. And it has a picture of like, death riding a pale horse. And he has no idea what to do with it. He thinks maybe if he shows it to somebody in combat, it might kill them or something. But he hasn't tried it yet because he's afraid it might only have like one use. So he hasn't used it for anything. He's just carrying it around. He doesn't even really know why she gave it to him, except that she said that he had nimble fingers because he is a rogue and he has expertise on stealth and sleight of hand. So he's been carrying this card around. But anyways, they realize that one of the figures standing beside Death is actually the crone who they mentioned before was like near death. Well, apparently now she's not so near. She's, actually at death. And so Death kind of like mocks the party at first, or Daryl mocks the party, saying that she betrayed them and everything else, right? And but she's also engages Neril, because Neril kind of prides himself, like he is the god of war, but he also like prides himself on being like kind of tricky and having a lot of strategy and stuff, right? But also a bit of a gambler, and I kind of liked that idea. Like you look at like the Devil Goes Down to Georgia or any of these like Faustian type deals and bargains. I kind of like the idea that like my god of like the underworld might be interested in like gambling or a game of chance, for everybody's souls. And so that's what I decided to do. Basically, the party ends up playing a game of Texas Hold'em against death. But the one Faye girl that dies, she ends up proposing that they use like some trump cards as well, like wild cards essentially, right? Just to make things even more interesting. Which of course, the biggest trump card is the death card, because we're here in the realm of death. And so all of a sudden, Eldon's just like, oh, I have the death card. She's already set this up in advance. So I knew this would be like kind of to give the party an edge, because honestly, I also knew that if the party lost, people were going to die, right? So the idea was the party were going to like wager a bunch of their own souls against death, wagering the souls of like Zhao Ling's husband and son and the one Fate's sister, right? So if the party lost, they were just going to die. That was it, right? Like I kind of knew that that's just what was going to happen. And I did want that random element, but I didn't want it to be just a completely 50-50 coin toss whether or not the campaign ended right here and now, right? So that's why I decided to introduce the wild card to stack things in the party's favor a little bit, but things could have still gone horribly wrong for me, to be honest. But fortunately, they did not. Eldon, and I made him roll for his sleight of hand too. I did know that I felt like Death, like he is quite intelligent. He Nero does do a lot of like strategy, warfare type stuff, but I also think that he's not as clever as he thinks he is, right? He's more of like, he's more of like physical type of god, right? He's great in hand-to-hand combat, but he can also plan and strategize, but he's maybe not the most perceptive. And so I gave him like above average like wisdom and stuff, but I didn't give him like, even though he's a god, I didn't give him godly levels of wisdom. I didn't give him like 28 wisdom or anything like that, right? So sure enough, Eldon makes his sleight of hand roll, boss rolls it, and managed to slink out one of their party's whole cards in exchange for the wild card. And they managed to make a full house and win back all the souls. They'd also extracted a promise from Nero that he would not try to stop them if they won, which he agreed to. So he decides to actually honor that bargain, and he does not try to stop the party from leaving. But he does send a bunch of his servants to stop them instead, because, he still likes to cheat a bit. What can we say? So I'd mentioned he has, or I didn't mention, but I'd mentioned to the party, one of his other advisors was like this, like kind of like fallen angel looking girl. And so sure enough, she shows up as they're nearing the gates, and big fight ensues. The fight is like actually like really close, because I threw like a lot of like just like cannon fodder against the party, because I wanted Death to like have a lot of minions, So he has like a couple of powerful minions that were like the big threat, but also there's just like hordes of like these low level like zombies and skeletons and gas and stuff like that, right? And so the party's actually having to like use a lot of crowd control and stuff just so they don't get like overwhelmed. And the fight ended up being like pretty touch and go. It ended up being pretty good, but in the end the party managed to succeed, and they managed to fight their way through. They get through the gates, and once they're beyond the gates into like they're kind of like halfway in between realm, they're pretty much good to go. They make the 9-day journey back. They cross the bridge back into the realm of the living, come back up through the giant long tunnel that in itself took like a day, by the way, to go down the first time, and back up through the shell of the giant turtle god, and basically managed to restore Zhao Ling and her family back to life again, right? So Zhao Ling and her husband decide that they're going to end the civil war again and end all the years of strife, essentially. And at this point, Zhao Ling's pretty much taken over everything anyways, and even though she's mostly a good guy, like I said, she's also what's hers is hers in her opinion. That's why she kind of took over the Red Monastery, which was always politically neutral in the past, but she's like, no, I saved you guys by lifting the siege and destroying the enemy army. Now you're mine. What do you do? But anyways, so that's basically Zhao Ling's story. At this point, she kind of leaves. We also end up losing Brendan. So he ends up dropping out of the campaign. We lose Philandros the monk. So Phil decides, well, we decide for Phil, that he's going to return to the Red Monastery to continue his time there and maybe take over as like a training other new students and whatnot, right? And so we have a couple weeks where we don't have anybody else, which is fine. We still have 4 players. But we end up recruiting a friend of Trish's and Mike's named Megan. And Megan was a new player. She'd never played D&D before, which ended up leading to some pretty hilarious results, to be honest. And she ends up playing a druid named Ari, who the party doesn't meet quite yet, but they're going to meet very, very quickly. So now that everything is done with Zhao Ling, Eldon decides what he really wants, now that we went through all this effort with the Fae to get him a magical crossbow. What he really wants was a gun. One of the books that he read about in the Red Monastery described these like firearms that belonged to all these dwarves, and the dwarves are like way in the north, a completely other part of the world, and a lot of the stuff in the book is actually wrong, because I mean these dwarves are basically just, you know, it's just rumors of rumors at this point, right? But they do get the guns right, and the player characters don't know anything about it, but the players themselves, they know that in the last campaign, the Whitespire campaign, they met an NPC named Luther who worked for the Inquisition, right? But Luther had a firearm that he'd gotten from this dwarf. And Luther claims, which is true, this is how he actually got it, but him and this dwarf were like up in the north. They were basically stranded. The dwarf had like a broken leg because they ended up fighting this like cave troll thing, right? And Luther saves the guy's life and then spends like 2 weeks dragging him through the wilderness with this like makeshift litter through all the snow and stuff, and trying to defend the guy against other threats, and finally gets him back to the dwarf homeland. And so the guy decides to reward Luther by giving him a firearm and teaching him how to repair it and maintain it and make more ammo for it and stuff. So Troy's just like, well, we already know they did it for one guy. Like, if we do something cool for the dwarves, maybe they'll give me firearms too, right? So they decide that they're going to go to the other side of the world and try to get themselves some firearms. Not through theft, though, but by helping the dwarves. So that's what they decided to do. And it was kind of funny to me because as I started thinking about it, the biggest city in that part of the world, at least that, you know, regular trade goes to, is Whitespire. And then, you know, there's also the Dwarven Kingdom beyond that. But these dwarves are actually north of those dwarves even. These are like these like ice Viking dwarves essentially, right? And they have like these big ships that they use and they just row, and they mostly live above ground actually, these dwarves. And yeah, they're basically just like Viking dwarves. So anyways, the party ends up booking passage on the ship and they sail up and they end up landing in Whitespire. And it ends up being really cool. I thought it'd be kind of fun, but it ended up being way more fun than I thought it'd be. Because all the players, like, they like remember all the places they went before. They remember like all the NPCs and stuff, right? So like they're trying to find directions and they end up finding this gnome cabbie, and he's got this horse that looks like it's going to be dead in like 3 days time, but it's actually been 9 years since Mike first met this guy. So his horse is 9 years closer to death somehow, and it still hasn't passed away. But anyway, so they end up meeting him, and the players all remember him, and they end up seeing like this dwarven town crier that they'd met before, and they end up going to like the Hungry Troglodyte where the demon whale was, and so they end up seeing there, and they don't end up meeting Vance and his crew because the players this time have no reason to do it, but they see Vance and all his friends, and because Vance and them were all regulars there, right? And they see Crispin even, and Patty, Crispin's wife, who like runs the place and stuff, right? But ever since they first met Vance, back when they were like level 2 or whatever it was back in the day, there was also a different group of regulars that were there every time they went. And it was this group of dwarves. And they'd never interacted with the dwarves with their other player characters, but the dwarves were always there. And the dwarves weren't necessarily unfriendly, it's just, you know, like Vance and his group did their thing and they were regulars, and the dwarves did their thing. And the two groups would interact occasionally, but, you know, they were more like friendly acquaintances, right? And so they'd never had any reason to meet the dwarves before. But now they're here to meet the dwarves, And so they see Vance and all the other guys, and they end up not interacting with them, but they're like, "Oh, that's them." So it was pretty awesome. They're remembering everything and whatnot. So they meet the dwarves, and of course, one of the dwarves is like, "Well, actually, like, I was originally like born up in the north there with those tribes. So I, pay me a bunch of gold, and I can take you there," kind of thing, right? So that's what they decide to do. So they hire this guy, and sure enough, they make the long trek up to the Dwarven Kingdom, and then beyond the Dwarven Kingdom up into the frozen wastelands. And these like Viking dwarf type guys, right, are basically at war with like all these giants, which is one of the reasons why they have the guns. That's what's allowed them to like stay in things and not just be completely obliterated, right? But the giants are also like very tribal, and they're always very fragmented, right? So they start finding out these rumors that there's actually like this giant army though marching on the city, and apparently the giant tribes have all been united under this one like giant war chief that's emerged, and he's managed to like kill a bunch of the other chiefs and unites the tribes under himself, right? So the party's like, well, I think we know what we're going to be having to do when we get there. So along the way though, they end up meeting a druid by the name of Ari, who of course is Megan's character. And they ended up helping to save her. She was captured by like Wendigos or Yeti or whatever it was at the time. I can't remember. I remember they ended up fighting a bunch of like albino death weasels as well, which was from the Tome of Beasts, which I just thought were hilarious. Not a very particularly tough challenge, by the way. I just wanted them to fight albino death weasels, because who wouldn't, So anyways, they end up meeting up with Ari. So she's now joined the team. They end up finding the dwarves. Sure enough, they kind of pitched. They're like, "Hey, kind of want to learn how to like make and use your firearms." And the dwarves are like, "Well, actually, we kind of got our own problems right now. There's an army of giants that are like 2 days out, and they're going to try to like destroy the city, and bring us all down, kind of thing, right?" And they're like, "Well, we'll help you with that, and you give us a couple firearms." So the dwarves are like, "Look, if you prove useful, we're not making any promises yet, but if you do it, we'll consider it." So sure enough, the party ends up helping out. This session ends up just being like nothing but pure combat, which was rather unfortunate, because it was just combat, and a lot of it was like mass combat with like tons of giants. So the giants got tons of hit points, and there's an army of them, and the fight's just taking forever. And it ended up being pretty rough too. Like some of the party members end up going down and whatnot. But eventually, the party manages to confront the giant war chief. They end up killing him, kill some of the other giant leaders, and realizing that the chief is dead, the giants begin to like fragment again and all break off and scatter, run to the hills, Iron Maiden style. Anyways, so sure enough, there's a huge celebration, and the party is indeed given a couple firearms, and the artificer decides that he wants to try to like enchant them and make them magical. So of course he does, because he just uses his imbue ability on them. So that way Eldon has some magical weapons still. And the party decide to return back to Whitespire again. And here they end up meeting. Oh yeah, because they're not really sure what else to do, but they decide, well, we'll figure it out. We'll go back to Whitespire, right? But here they end up meeting Kenosha, who is the high priestess from the Temple of Mishnak. And Mishnak is the goddess of divination and prophecy. And Kenosha's actually a character. Well, actually, she's mentioned in my book, but she's like a different character completely. I just kind of took the same name and a couple of same ideas. But anyways, but she's actually an NPC that the party had originally met back in the day as well, when they were like level 4, I think, when they had the outbreak of the magical disease at the Docks district in Whitespire. So there are other characters that met her, but none of them remembered her either, because that was, to be fair, that was the only time they met her. And then it was mentioned another time when they go after my version of Pennywise, the evil goblin jester creature, right? It was basically the clown. They met another priest from the temple who had been sent by Kenosha, but they didn't meet Kenosha that time around. So they'd heard the name a few times, but didn't ring any bells. But that's okay. Just so people watching it know, though, that there is a plan up here. Okay, there is a definite strategy. Anyways, so they find out, all they know about Ash is that she appears to be a tiefling and she's at some place called the Courts of Chaos. So Kenosha, though, is waiting for the party because she's also had a viewing, and she's able to help the party and steer them in the right direction, right? So the Courts of Chaos end up being in like limbo, like where the Slatty and the Githyanki and stuff are all from, right? And or the Githzeri limbo. One of them's the astral plane, one's limbo. I think it's the Githyanki that are limbo. Anyways, so the party ended up going there. They end up finding this like bizarre thing, which is like this, you know, like this, I don't know, like this weird like tent city, but half the tents all appear to be like magical and stuff. And there's like all these like weird creatures selling stuff. So they meet this one creature, and the guy has like his head is basically like huge because his body's like this spindly little thing with like these little Tyrannosaurus type of arms, you know. But his head has just this one giant eye that takes up like 90% of the head, right? And then he's got some hair at the top and stuff. It's just this weird looking thing, right? And he also sells, the most expensive thing in the store is like this magical eye that he's trying to sell. And the party's like, what do it do? But it casts like true seeing and, you know, detect invisible and stuff like that. And they're like, okay, well, that's kind of cool. But like, why is it so much money? And he's like, you know, like he can't believe it. Like to him, like, obviously a magical eye is the greatest thing ever, you know? I mean, his entire body is 80% eye at this point. Well, probably 70%. The head was 90%, but the whole body, 70% eye, right? You know, so to him, this was great. And the party's just like, what is wrong with this guy? But one of the party members ends up seeing something that they've been kind of like, it feels familiar to them, right? And it's basically this puzzle box, which was kind of like my ode to the Hellraiser series. There's no Cenobites, don't worry about that. I didn't want to make it too obvious, but I like the idea that there's like this magical puzzle box, and inside it there was like this labyrinth, because one of the cards when I drew for Ash for the viewing was the labyrinth. And so she was like, or the maze, or whatever it's called, right? So she's trapped in this maze, and I just figured, oh, okay, she's trapped inside the puzzle box. She goes to the Courts of Chaos to try to escape Talakara, the Primarch, and gets trapped. So anyway, the party, though, the one character actually like hears something, like almost trying to like whisper to it from inside the box. But it's not like, doesn't appear to be addressing the party member. It's just like they can hear something or sense something. So they decide to just steal the box. And of course the eye guy tries to stop them, but they kill him. And all of a sudden these like alarms start sounding from like somewhere in the tent city. And the whole thing just suddenly starts folding up. And they're like, the guards! And all of a sudden these like giant like golem things just start like coming out in the streets. And the party are just like, yeah, we should probably run too. Like if literally everybody else is running, including like angels and demons and all the like Slad and everything else that are here at this bazaar, if they're all fleeing, we should probably get going too. Which was a good idea, by the way. These things were no joke. So, and like I said, within like 5 minutes, the whole bazaar, which is huge, just like completely packs up and is gone. And like this one guy who literally like his entire tent folds up and drops into like this giant bag of holding, and he just like closes the bag and runs away with the tent. But anyways, so they all like get the heck out of there. And they decide to try to like undo the puzzle box and find whoever's in it. Of course, the artificer decides to try, and I believe, so Jaden's playing the artificer. This is the same guy who played Crag, and had notoriously terrible luck anytime he really needed to do anything that didn't involve smashing somebody with an axe. So needless to say, his luck in this campaign has been a lot better, but tonight he starts channeling that inner Crag again. So he decides to solve the puzzle box, rolls a 1, and instead of releasing Ash from the puzzle box, sucks the entire party into the puzzle box instead. So now they're all trapped in the labyrinth as well. So they end up like navigating it though, and eventually sure enough, they find Ash, who they recognize from the viewing they had with like the Fae sisters, right? Ash ends up telling them her story, which is basically that she was like this warrior priestess who was in charge of like fighting on this one world, right? And so I kind of mentioned this in the episode 0 for the Broken Lands, but my friend Jaden had run this campaign game, or this game called Endless Realms, right? So it's not Dungeons and Dragons, it's like a anime kind of inspired roleplay to a certain degree, I guess. But the idea is there's all these portals that lead to like infinite worlds, essentially, right? And one of the characters or the only character I played in that, was this like priestess chick named Talakara. And my idea was that Talakara was eventually gonna like become this like lawful evil tyrant, essentially. They didn't have alignments in that game, but if they did, she was gonna be a lawful evil tyrant. But of course, she didn't think she was evil, right? There was always this pursuit of the greater good, just like most authoritarian tyrants always claim they're working and everybody's good, you know? So that was her plan, though, is that she was going to take things over. But we didn't finish the campaign, and personally, I kind of feel like evil NPCs often don't work very well, especially if you're not in an evil party. But I thought she'd make a great villain, and so I decided to use her as a villain for this part of the campaign. So Ash is one of her followers. Talakara at this point is just known as the Primarch, and she rules like these 9 different worlds that are all connected through the gateways, right? But she's also like invading a bunch of other worlds and their war and stuff, and she's trying to conquer them, right? So Ash, partly through attrition, because all the people above her had died, she's now become the leader of this particular faction on this one world, and she's up against this person that they just call the leader, and it's just this woman in this like armor who wears this mask, right? And she's got like this cloak over the armor as well, right? And the leader always seems to be like 1 or 2 steps ahead of Ash. And Ash isn't a bad fighter. She's like a fighter cleric multi-class, I think. She's not as good as Xiaoling, though. Let's be clear about that. That became very clear as the campaign went on, when Xiaoling was like just, action surging and smiting people and doing truckloads of damage. And Ash, she was alright. Anyways, eventually though, they end up like, she keeps going up against the leader and keeps like losing, even though she has superior forces. And so she starts getting worried that the Primarch's going to start losing patience with her. But eventually, she ends up trying to set an ambush for the leader, right? Of course, the leader seems to have anticipated this and turns the tables on them. And they end up retreating through this portal into this other world. So Ash and her forces come through. But then the portal closes behind them. And they're in this, like, giant white forest. And, like, the whole thing is, like, bathed in this white light. But there's no, like, sun. It's just, everything's white. But there's also no sound in the entire realm, right? So you can't talk, like, your mouth can work, but you can't. Smashing stuff, no sound. No sound at all in this entire world. And Ash realizes that this is actually some sort of trap, because now most of her spellcasters can't use their verbal components on the spells. And so even though she outnumbers the leader's forces, suddenly one of her biggest weapons, which is all her spellcasters, have been mostly neutralized. So the fight ends up going, and of course, in true epic fashion, eventually everybody on both sides is dead except for Ash and the leader. And they end up having their big duel, and Ash eventually manages to win and stabs the leader through the chest, and the leader collapses on the ground. She reaches inside her robes to try to grab something, so Ash grabs her hand thinking that it's some sort of weapon, but instead it turns out that it's a letter addressed to Ash by name in her own handwriting. And suddenly she's like, what the heck? And she reaches up and takes off the mask, and it's her face. And so now she doesn't know if it's like a future version of her, or if it's like an alternate version of her from a different world, because, there are endless realms. It's kind of like this multiverse thing. To be honest, I don't even know. I just thought it'd be a cool twist if it was her. Why not, I thought it'd make an interesting story. But in the letter, she explains to herself about how she's learned that the Primarch is basically a lie, right? Like, in the 900 years since Talakara has risen to power, she's like betrayed and murdered everybody, and has seized power through like just terrible means, and has become a total authoritarian nutcase, right? Like they usually do. And there's like these 2 books of scripture, I figure, for their people, right? Because Talakara, she's a class called a Judicar, I think it was called, or the Justicar. Basically, they're like priests of order, right? But they're kind of like a combination of clerics and wizards, and but they use order magic. And so I had these 2 books. One was the Book of Laws, and one was the Book of Deeds. And the Book of Deeds is actually like the stories of Telakara and her friends and the deeds they did in life as she, established, the realms and everything else, right? So Ash is very familiar with these books because she's a priestess of the religion, and she's read them all her life and stuff, right? But in the letter, she talks about how she ends up finding this secret tunnel underneath the Primarch's bedroom that leads into this secret library, and there she finds not some like modern version of the Book of Deeds, but like the original Book of Deeds written by the Primarch herself in her own hands, where she explains in like excruciating detail how she like betrayed and murdered everybody and just how she like clawed her way to power. And Ash realized that or other version of Ash realized that basically everything she's read has just been like this whitewashed propagandized version of the truth. And over 900 years it barely resembles, it's mostly like fables and superstitions almost, or not superstitions, but fables and legends about, what the true events with, none of the horrific details still remaining, right? And so she ends up getting caught though by the Primarch, because Ash starts like coming back to her every night to try to read it while the Primarch's actually in a different realm. But the Primarch ends up returning earlier than expected and catches Ash in her secret library reading the book. And the Primarch really just keeps the book because she just, wants to have her own handwritten record still that she wrote. And I think it's kind of like a perverse pleasure knowing that, or maybe it is guilt, who knows? Because I think Telakara still kind of wants to be that good person she saw herself as, but at this point, she's just gone way too far, and, she's just an evil tyrant monster at this point, right? So, sure enough, our version of Ash ends up returning. She ends up getting this huge promotion. She gets elevated to one of the 13, which are like this council of like priests and warriors that all like serve the Primarch directly, right? So now she's not off on some remote world. She's like on the main world, right? Also, they have a fixation with prime numbers, by the way. They have the Primarch, and then you've got 3, and then there's 5, and there's 7 or something else, and 11 or something else, and there's like the Council of 13, whatever. Just a minor side note. Anyways, so sure enough, our Ash does the same thing. She starts going every night when the Primarch's off-world, reading the book, and kind of like this horrific fascination, right? That she like doesn't want to know the truth, but she can't help it. She just keeps going back. But of course, just like in the letters, when she warns herself, she gets caught. I forgot to mention, along with the letter though, there was also like this amulet, right? Which she was told would take her to the Courts of Chaos. And it only had one use left, but she was to use it to flee if the Primarch catches her, right? Which of course she does. And the reason she flees to the Courts of Chaos is because, like I said, Telakara is like an order priestess, right? And so her powers are obviously at their weakest when you're in like some realm devoted to chaos, and a lot of her magic's gone. Unfortunately for Telakara, or for Ash though, she's also an order priestess, and so a lot of her power was also useless, which is probably how she was trapped by Giant Eye Guy and locked into the puzzle box. But anyways, the party managed to overcome some challenges, find their way to escape the puzzle box, and join up with Ash. They managed to reach this tower, which was like this kind of like this tower that was like kind of like this confluence of worlds, right? And this was actually from Jaden's game. I don't think it was originally part of the setting or whatever, but he had this tower that he had introduced, and we were actually trying to get there and then find out what was going on with it. And it was supposed to be like this place where a bunch of different realms would all meet up, right? So the party ended up going there. Of course, it's 900 years in the future, and we found out the tower's actually been damaged. So the party decided they probably need to repair the tower, which is a good idea. But there's also like some guardians of the tower still, so they have to fight a bunch of stuff. There's also some like demons and stuff that have managed to come in because now the portal walls have been breached. Chaos is kind of coming in, and the forces of law, or an order, like all breaking down essentially. They also find these things called the Black Pattern Dancers, So White Wolf has something called the Black Spiral Dancers, which are all these like werewolf type things that worship chaos, the Great Worm, right? And they dance this black spiral that gives them all sorts of like weird shamanistic evil powers. And I kind of like that idea, so I decided to go with something similar. But one of the things I decided, like, because the walls of the tower are breached and like the forces of law are like draining out, and law is actually weakening here in these realms now. I like the idea that it was all like getting sucked out into the void, which was making like this black hole. And so the party is actually seen multiple times now, like all this like energy going from the tower out into space, and it's just kind of all swirling closer and closer into this like black hole, essentially, right? But the priests of law who used to, you know, be here to serve Talakara, they've actually all gone insane, and now they all worship the black pattern. So the party ended up having to fight them. I thought the fight would actually be a little closer. Oh, part of the reason why, I should mention as well, is one of the other classes in Endless Realms was the Dancer, who was kind of like a rapier using duelist type, but they have a bunch of magic they can do through like dance and through like different forms, right? So like fighting forms and stuff. You use different styles, and that can empower your magical abilities and stuff. So I kind of wanted to like another tribute to that game as well, but just, you know, here in this campaign for D&D. The party ended up destroying the Black Pattern Dancers, so I thought they would actually be a tougher fight, but no, the party absolutely destroyed them. But they managed to repair the tower. They go to like the Primarch's like main city. They actually try to hook up with some people Ash knows, who she thinks were like part of like the rebellion or the underground movement, right? The resistance, of course. So I ended up meeting up with them. One of them wasn't really sure if he was going to help or not. One of them was like totally on board, and the other one was kind of like, yeah, okay, like I don't really like what's happening these days either. Like there is something definitely wrong here, you know. Like maybe once the Primarch was a good person, but you know that we do seem to be living under martial law forever. And there's always like some more threat. There's always like the forces of chaos are always at the gates. You know, just give me a little bit more power so I can defeat them for you, and then you'll get your freedom back. 900 years later, it still hasn't happened. So the party was kind of suspicious about the one guy doesn't want to help. So the rest of the party decided to follow him because they think he might betray them. But Troy, playing Eldon the Rogue, he's actually suspicious of the guy that was really enthusiastic about helping them. And Troy's instincts proved to be correct. So Eldon the Rogue decides to follow the guy who was totally on board. And sure enough, he makes plans to try to betray the party the next night. Because they were supposed to be meeting again to, like, you know, confirm their plans, right? So he ends up going to a bunch of the Primarch's guards and talks to them. And the party decided, okay, well, tomorrow we're still going to go to the meeting spot, but we're going to ambush these guys. So sure enough, they go there. Eldon, along with an illusion of one of the party members, they go into the house. The guy sees them, and he goes in to meet them. And the guards kind of like all close in, right? And then Eldon, of course, being super stealthy, he ends up like sneaking out again. And the party like wait for most of the guards to like enter the house and then barricade it, and probably not their best moment, but they just light the place on fire and basically seal everybody in. And yeah, that's how they dealt with that problem. Good stuff. Krogel, the demonologist, was totally on board. Everybody else was kind of like, yeah, okay. Yeah, so they end up stopping the ambush, or ambushing the guards, actually killing all of them, and they end up finding their own way in, which is through the sewers. And so eventually they manage to make their way to like the court, and they end up having their big fight with Talakara and a bunch of her guards. This fight was pretty good as well. It was definitely better than the fight with the Black Spiral Dancers, or Black Pattern Dancers. And I gave Talakara a bunch of like abilities to kind of mimic the abilities that she would have had in the other game, you know. So most of them were like spell-like actions or whatever, right? And so it ended up being a pretty good fight. The party, of course, managed to win, though. Talakar is killed. The party also like get the Book of Deeds and reveal like to people like, what actually happened, so that things can hopefully be restored to normal. But they are kind of in chaos. People do kind of appoint Ash to possibly be the new interim leader, but nobody's really sure what's going on. The party's also given as a reward part of the Demonomicon of Igwilv, which was part of Talakar's personal library. So not only does she have her own evil books, but apparently she was collecting parts of other evil books as well. So of course, Krogel the Demonologist takes the Demonomicon fragment and keeps it, which will be relevant in the next episode when we talk about what happens when he gets the rest of the book. Oh man, Krogel, what a delight you were. Anyways, so they managed to help Ash. The Primarch is killed. Maybe things get better, maybe not. There was Krogel decided that at some point in the future he wants to go and just take over where Talakara left off. So yeah, their future doesn't look any better. Oh jeez. Anyways, that basically did it. The party ends up returning to Whitespire again to try to figure out where to go from here. They still know that they need to meet this half-orc and they need to meet the mouse, but those both end up happening in the next section. So that basically resolves things here with the death of the Primarch and the liberation, perhaps, of the Endless Realms that she was ruling, seven worlds, because it was a prime number again. The 7 worlds that she had control over. And yeah, that basically does it. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Like I said, we've only got one more episode left for the Broken Lands campaign review. And like I said, I know these aren't exactly my most popular videos, but that's okay. I maybe there's something in here that other dungeon masters or players can kind of take from, or say like, hey, I like this or I like that, or if I'm like, yeah, we had a fight with the dwarves and the giants and it was just 5 straight hours of combat. Maybe don't do that, because that was a rough night of gaming. Oh well, we live and we learn, right? Anyways, that's everything I have. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I was going to do the light cleric next, but I realized I actually did like cleric back like a long time ago. It's actually one of my earlier videos. So instead, we're probably going to do the Tempest Cleric, I think. Mostly because my friend Mike, who was the guy who played Krogel in that campaign with the Demonomicon of Igwilv and an army of demons by the end of the game, he is playing a Tempest Cleric in the campaign that I'm in right now. My friend Jaden is running Descent to Avernus, and so now I've got a chance to see one played for more than like 3 levels or whatever was the other experience we had with one. Then I figure I'm in a little better place to talk about it. So anyways, that's everything for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.